About 18 months ago, Tom Hunley, our senior editor, was contacted by Dorothy Wickenden, the managing editor at The New Yorker, and she said that a young freelancer on contract with the magazine was on to a remarkable story about Syria, a story with the potential to lay out the war crimes of President Bashar al-Assad in a way that had never been done before, but a story that to complete would require several months of work in Europe and well more than the resources that The New Yorker had to put to that project. The young freelancer was Ben Taub, and the story was The Assad Files, a journalist sensation when it was published last spring, and the winner since of multiple awards, including the Overseas Press Club and the Robert F. Kennedy Award for Best International Reporting. It was an honor for us to be part of that collaboration, and so later in the year when Ben and Dorothy came back to us with another request to support an ambitious attempt to get at the roots of Europe's migrant crisis, it was an easy decision to give it our support. I'm not going to tell you the story because Ben's going to tell you about that story, but I'm so pleased that he can be with us to share this extraordinary story published a few weeks ago in The New Yorker, and so honored that the Pulitzer Center can play this role in supporting such careers. It's what we're about, and it's a privilege every day. So, Ben.
Thank you, John, for those extremely kind remarks and for the support. Honestly, neither of these stories would have been anywhere close to possible without the support of the Pulitzer Center. They each took upwards of 7 months, including at least 3 months of travel and reporting in many countries. So to the second one, the one that came out quite recently. Last September, I boarded a rescue boat run by the medical charity Médecins Sans Frontières. And my intention at the time was to write about the two deadliest portions of the mass migration route from Africa into Europe across the Sahara Desert and the Mediterranean Sea. And we left Malta at dawn, and beyond the broad topic, I really had no idea what shape the story would take. This kind of uncertainty in the field is, for me, as I'm sure for many of you, a constant source of anxiety. So often we have just one chance to witness whatever it is that defines our work: a rescue at sea, a natural disaster, a war crime, a tender moment between sisters or soldiers or friends. And so often I am filled with fear that I will get it wrong, or that I will misinterpret what I've seen, or that the details that catch my attention will not reflect something larger than themselves. What if I'm looking in the wrong direction during some moment, the moments most in need of a witness? So back in the Mediterranean, near Libya, after several days of searching for drowning migrants and finding none, the MSF crew rescued 355 people out of disposable dinghies. The boats had left the beaches near Tripoli with only enough fuel to reach international waters, and without NGOs carrying out sea rescues, many of them would have drowned. The journey back to Italy would take 2.5 days. I walked around the ship, stepping over sprawled limbs and torsos, and speaking to migrants about why they'd left home. Most of them came from West Africa. They were eager to talk about the horrors they had endured in Libya, but on the lower deck, I noticed a group of teenage Nigerian girls sitting together in silence. I sat down nearby and I struck up conversation with one of them, a girl named Blessing. She confided that she had been kidnapped, but she gave no further details. Another girl next to her stayed quiet, listening as tears streamed down her cheeks. By the time we reached the port of Messina 2 days later on the eastern coast of Sicily, I had begun to understand that criminal networks had co-opted sea rescues as a reliable means of delivering underage African girls to Europe's prostitution market. Italy is merely the entry point. From there, once they get documents, trafficking victims are traded and sold all over the continent. I spent the days after disembarkation, as the migrants disembark from the boats, they get into these buses and disappear. And I spent the days after disembarkation, walking between migrant camps in Messina looking for Blessing, wondering if she'd already vanished. But I eventually found her, and when I did, she told me that if I wanted to understand how she had been trafficked, I needed to start in Benin City, in southern Nigeria. So, with a grant from the Pulitzer Center, whose support has made possible the wildest journalistic ambitions of many of the people in this room, and many of the speakers on the panels this afternoon and tomorrow, I went there. I found her mother in a spare parts market, and I spent months retracing Blessing's journey across the desert and the sea, piecing together a story of betrayal, desperation, debt bondage, bandits, hope, and death along the ancient caravan routes of the trans-Saharan slave trade. As with every project I've done for The New Yorker, first of all, it would take me an hour to read it to you, but also the reporting began as a series of missteps, things that led me to discover something I had never considered looking into, not because I had dismissed it, but because I hadn't known that it had existed or of its urgency. So today, you may think, those of you who have read the piece may think of sex trafficking as the only lens through which to see this story, but that's because you only saw its construction in retrospect, long after the various pieces had been collected and assembled and could be traced from the printed page back to those fraught moments on the rescue ship 7 or 8 months earlier. If our boat hadn't picked up teenage Nigerian girls, I would have written something else. Or if Blessing hadn't spoken to me, I would have written something else and been equally convinced today that it was the most urgent version of this migration that I could have taken on. So for the journalists in the room, I ask that you consider with your own projects, what obsession keeps you awake at night and hijacks your thoughts during quiet moments in the day? What awful or beautiful thing did you learn because you were there? This is the project you must take on and research it like mad and write it desperately until you can let it go. Briefly, I'd like to share a few principles that I've absorbed from wise mentors and from these travels that have taken me places I hadn't ever thought to go. Be confident and uncompromising in your pursuit of truth, but never forget that all facts require context and history and rigorous interrogation. Keep in mind that the people you encounter in different places may be unaware of the ways in which their lives intersect with broader networks or mechanisms. And when that is so, it's your responsibility to build that context on your own. Write no more than 10% of what you know, which means no more, so that you can be exact and discerning, and your words can have 10 times the depth of understanding behind them than can be seen on the page. Include equivocation and nuance as necessary, but delete every detail that the reader doesn't need to know to get from the beginning to the end. I often think of my job as a writer as using narratives to trick normal people into reading 11,000 words on sex trafficking or on Syria. But most of all, be careful always not to tread on the rights or dignity of anyone you meet. And try to imagine all the ways in which your work could hurt the most vulnerable among them so that it does not. I'd just like to say thank you again for having me here, and to the Pulitzer Center for supporting my work and that of so many people in this room, and of many future journalists, some of whom haven't even been born yet. Thanks again.